Sanbonani, Abusheni, good morning, Dumelang Molweni. Li Kamalami, which means my name is Msaka Gamona Gamashashane Lwashainyo Gawibig endleleni osilabanye batawundlula bayidobhe washaya imbuto ayibophele emhlangeni bakakhe abantwana abathuma dudane balabanye abathuma ekudzeni. I think that's my summary for now of who I am. But the summary is that I am Msaka Mona, lecturer here at UCT in language development in ADP. And I'm going to let briefly our panelists introduce themselves, and then I would let you guys know why we are here. What's the topic for our session? Kenan?
Okay. Hi there. My name's Kenan Hendrikse. I'm a teaching assistant and postgraduate student in the sociology department at UCT.
Thank you. And then over to Glenda.
Great. I'm Glenda Cox in the Center for Innovation and Learning and Teaching. So I'm in staff development and I've been in staff development for many years, but my passion is in open education. So that's what I'm interested in.
Great. Lovely to have you both into this panel. And I think it's a great combination because what seems to be common is the passion for social justice and decoloniality, which we'll hear about from Kenan as well. And I mean, there's the, I guess this is why I introduced the topic really in terms of how we work towards social justice in teaching and learning, and maybe also what are some of the injustices that we can identify. Some of them can be economic, can be cultural and linguistic, some of them can be political. And we are also interested in finding ways of sort of figuring out how does non-recognition play out to perpetuate in injustice. And then we're just gonna jump into it. I'm keen to hear from Kenan because you've been in over 50 committees at UCT.
Yeah.
So you have a lot of institutional knowledge that perhaps can help us navigate how we can sort of take practical steps. And also to put you on the spot, you might be of the view that we're probably in a sort of rhetoric or we're in a metaphorical space in our approaches to decoloniality and social justice, but how do we get out of the rhetoric?
I mean, difficult questions, but I think some things that I've tried to reflect on a fair amount. I mean, firstly, I was on the SRC, I think, for the first time 10 years ago. It feels a lot soon. It went by very quickly. And then continuing that, both as a student leader as well as in various staff roles, I think it's made clear to me some of the stumbling blocks in terms of achieving this thing called decoloniality, whatever you know you make of it. But I do think I'm a lover of governance. I do think the governance structures can assist us to achieve our goals. But at the same time, we need to be clear about what that goal is.
Okay.
What on earth are we talking about when we mean decoloniality? Not to disparage anyone, I think, but I think we've entered into this mire of decoloniality discourse that seems to say that everything that we don't like is colonial, and everything that we possibly want to achieve is decolonial. But I think that's an important point for us to start interrogating ourselves on. So yes, I think when we need to start to ask ourselves that question, instead of simply just entering into this rhetorical quagmire.
Now I have a million questions for you. I mean, is decoloniality necessary for social justice in a space such as UCT? Can you achieve social justice if you don't decolonize?
I think I at least don't think so. Because I think part of when we speak about, decoloniality generally, you think of the issues of power, you think of the issues of the coloniality of power, knowledge, and being, and everything that we do and try to do in terms of decoloniality. In my mind, it fits into all of those. So I don't think we can actually achieve true justice without starting to at least ask ourselves those questions.
Okay, great. Let me try and tie what you are saying with the work that Glenda is doing in terms of the open textbook initiative. You'd explain about Glenda. I mean, you do say that decoloniality brings issues of power, dynamics. And I guess here in a learning institution, those are issues of knowledge production, who's allowed to produce knowledge, who is allowed to disseminate knowledge, and who's also allowed or not allowed to access knowledge. And obviously, I mean, books have a lot to do with that. Glenda, what are you working on? And in terms of the power dynamics that have an impact in the knowledge production project, what does that entail in the kind of work that you are doing?
So I think I'd like to take one step back and talk about social justice a little, and why you have to decolonize as part of social justice. They are hand in hand. You cannot have one without the other. My great thanks to the plenary presentation that was just on now. I'm not sure if everybody had the opportunity to listen to that, but her underlying philosophy is also based on the work of Nancy Fraser, who's a feminist political theorist. And what Nancy Fraser allows is that we can examine a framework. So she gives us a practical theoretical approach to looking at these issues. And that's where I feel having a sound sort of theoretical base helps us to move from that theory into practice a little bit more.
Yeah.
And she talks about parity of participation as being the ultimate goal of being what we're looking for. And she talks about it on 3 different levels. So she talks about the economic, which is access to resources, so redistribution of resources. She talks about the cultural, which relates to misrecognition and recognition of cultural attributes. So that's where I see the decolonizing really fitting into this particular framework, because it's recognizing the cultural attributes that have been excluded. And then importantly, she talks about the political. And here she's talking about political voice. And the voice has been either misrepresented or misframed. So 3 very interesting dimensions. And what she says about this is it's all intertwined. You can't have one without the other. You can't give resources out necessarily without voice, without decolonizing, without localizing. And so they're intermeshed and intertwined. And she has this interesting statement that she says, no redistribution or recognition without representation. So you can see how all of those fit together. And then she also talks about those dimensions are either affirmative or transformative. So she's got this scale, and both address social justice. So you can make an affirmative change, which she calls targets the end state outcomes, or you can make a transformative approach, which is a complete disruption. So that looks at the root causes of the issue. Okay, so ultimately that's what we want to really be thinking about, is this transformative approach, and almost breaking down structures and rebuilding them. Okay, so that's kind of where we're at in terms of higher education and what we need to do. And then, so then I want to talk about open textbook. This is an example of an open textbook. And so the open textbook, what is it? Well, it's crucially openly licensed. So it's free. So textbooks that students can take are free. So there we have kind of this economic argument, because it doesn't, although fees must fall, we also think about textbook costs must fall, right? It also allows for multimedia. There are a lot of quite cool, funky things that it can potentially do, considering it's digital.
Yeah.
But it also allows for print, and it can be on a lot of different platforms, okay? But very importantly, what it does is it's not only about the content of this book, it's about the process.
Yeah.
Because the process of creating this book is collaborative and inclusive. And depending on the approach of the author, it can be to the point where students are brought in on various levels to create this. And actually, it's pedagogical change, because all of a sudden you're rethinking, you know, how you're creating your content and selecting your content. And just to give kind of an example, I know I'm talking a lot now, but that's okay. So potentially this can challenge the status quo and shift power dynamics.
Yes.
Okay, from the traditional role of the educator creating all the content. And it can address issues of relevance, so local examples, relevant examples that when students come into the classroom, they can actually understand what's going on. And also counter existing publishing models, okay? So that's also the kind of disruption that we're looking for. And open textbook authors have these amazing, we've been doing some research and asking them questions about this experience of how they worked, how it's changed their practice. And it's amazing how they've helped the students to realize the power in publication. Yeah. So it's not only creation, but it's also the students have authored this. So they get their moment of fame, they get their power to publish. But also one of the open textbook authors said, you can include person's own embodied experience and lived realities in this. So very interesting possible avenue to really kind of think about unjust social arrangements and respond to these arrangements. And it's one tool, and we'll talk about the challenges and limitations perhaps later. But we really felt the authors became so much more aware of every single student in their classroom. Sure. And they were brilliant educators anyway. This wasn't necessarily something new, but it heightened that. And this idea of kind of equal moral worth, that everybody should be participating. Sure. And the exciting aspect is that students can be part of their own academic journey.
Thank you. See, now I have 10 million questions for you. And thank you for bringing in Nancy Fraser to sort of frame what you mean by social justice. If I also remember correctly, Fraser does also say that in terms of respecting, previously marginalized group, them you might need to put measures to apply to upwardly recognize them, to revalue those groups that we devalued, right? But there is also a problem of structure, right? There would be a particular structure that made it possible for those groups to be not valued. I mean, in terms of knowledge production in textbooks. So, Glenda, from the work that you do, what has been some of the challenges that are making it difficult for people to say, I want to publish and I want to take the route of open textbook, but what are the obstacles that are there that people are having to battle through?
So I think certainly resourcing. I mean, I think there are a number of big structures that need to change. And one of the authors said, no matter what you do, the institution is not changing. And even got to a point where he actually left UCT because he felt that the change was so slow. There are things like, I think authors feel a sense of powerlessness to actually, it's not easy to do this kind of work.
Yeah.
It does require sort of courage.
Sure.
Because it's not,
Yeah.
this is not the way we've been thinking. It's not, it's traditional, academics as experts and so on. And that's how, that this is trying to debunk all of that and do something different. But resources, the slow changing structure of the university, but also the kind of idea of recognition for this work. So that is the reality. All of these authors, there's no recognition for this work. You're not making money out of this at all. But it's doing something that's incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
But the institution is not saying, this is a fantastic idea. We're going to give you some time off or resources to support it.
Yeah.
It's tough. You're in SRC, Kenan.
Yeah.
There was a time in your life where you were advocating for students' interest. But Glenda here is sharing with us scenarios where even staff members who want to take steps towards social justice are struggling. Before you were a staff member yourself, maybe the problem looked a certain way, right? Now you've had the privilege of being a student, now a staff member, and you've had that in between sort of moments to be able to appreciate what happens on either side of the struggle. How would you then bring this together to now say to a student who's thinking, they don't care about us, my lecturer doesn't care about me, I cannot access the knowledge and no one is doing anything. How would you reply to such?
I think and it is a question of the classic structure agency debates. To many students, most, not all, but most staff members do represent the structure. They seem to often be representatives of that structure that doesn't want to change. I think part of it, and I think some of the movements that happened 5 years ago started to break that down because people started to be honest about what they can and can't do, what they're willing to do. I think that's why Rhodes Must Fall even was such a powerful space, because we had spaces where we'd have a seminar, staff members would discuss real issues, would have issues about, would discuss all of these things. And I think fundamentally decoloniality does require an honesty about limitations and constraints of the structure. But similarly, it also requires a courage in terms of that agency that different actors have in the system. Saying that, because a lecturer saying, and that's often what we try to do, saying, okay, we may not be able to make all of these changes, but instead of having an essay, you're going to be writing a blog instead of. So I think it's about a certain honesty as well as a certain level of courage, and it does require, I think, and again, that coloniality of being, it does require an ontological shift, that honesty, because I think often we see that we have something to lose in that process of honesty. Because certain people are the bearers and holders of knowledge. And sometimes often there's a power to be lost in that honesty. But similarly, there's also a power to be gained in making those changes according to the agency that you do have, those changes in terms of assessment, in terms of pedagogical changes. So yeah.
You're complicating my life. Because look, so in terms of that honesty, the students will say, honestly, we are not happy. And this is why we are not happy. But after 3-4 years, the student graduates, whatever issues they've put on the table, they probably are not there to see what happened. We stay, the staff members, but there's obviously a level of volunteerism. To what extent do I want to change? To what extent do I not want to change? And then sort of it becomes a reoccurring, what's the English, man, guys? So we don't get there. We have the ideas. We, as you say, we have the theories, but practically, and this is not to say there are no efforts in the university spaces. We will get to that. But what you're saying is important in terms of framing our understanding of even those efforts, because they do come with challenges. So how do we then balance a situation where we are sort of aware of the problem, but not everyone is keen to say, I'll put my hand up and I will do 1, 2, 3. Glenda already said there's a level of thanklessness, in terms of non-recognition for open textbooks. There are colleagues elsewhere who have a lot of brilliant interventions, but you've got to take your own time off. You've got to explain why you are doing the not normal, right? So how do we balance that out?
I think there's a couple of things. The first thing to say is that yes, definitely the structure, I think, still paints certain things as legitimate knowledge, legitimate activities in higher education. But I think there's also, and that's where the agency comes in, there's also, I don't think we've effectively made the case for decoloniality and social justice. We're still framing it as a charitable activity that some people must do and others not. So I think the first thing to do is making clear what we stand to gain from decoloniality and social justice, and how coloniality does actually pull us further away from a true knowledge building enterprise. And so I think part of it is a marketing exercise that we are failing at. So I think that is definitely part of it. I think once we start making the case for for why decoloniality, why all of us stand to gain from decoloniality, is when we'll start to see those changes in structure. Because I mean, something like the Open Textbook Initiative, I mean, fundamentally reshapes who the holders of knowledge are. So it fundamentally shapes both our orientation to knowledge as well as the knowledge in and of itself. Where because students fundamentally, although they may not be, and that's why I think we often fall into the trap of not everything is knowledge and not everything should be regarded as legitimate knowledge in higher education, but everything needs to be given the opportunity to be presented as such, and then have decisions made about the power of that knowledge. But I don't think, again, I think we're still framing it as a charitable, and part of it requires reflection on our part. Why do we want to do the social justice stuff? Do we want to, are we framing it as again, cute, lovely things to do for students who just really need a hand up because they're really, I mean, their cultures really don't understand the knowledge project? Or are we framing it as actually we have something to lose and we have been losing out on not being willing to change ourselves agentially, as well as not being willing to change the structure?
Cool. Yo, his name is Kenan Hendricks. You can tell usemfutweni in my language. But I just also wanted to invite, I'm going to need help with this device, but people who are with us online, please do interrupt us with questions in the Q&A. If you have questions for any of us, that will be in the Q&A box where you can post your questions and we'll engage with them. Kenan, so you mentioned here that we've not necessarily sold or marketed, decolonization. In other words, what do we stand to gain if we decolonize? Obviously, we will not have the space here to try and do, but one of the good promises of decolonization is that it promises pluriversality, which is, entails a world in which many worlds can coexist. That could be the world of knowledge, which, in Klenda's space, being able to run a project where different ways of knowing can be accommodated. And you did touch on it earlier, Ken, in that decolonization, other people might think it's to do with whatever we don't like, we kick out. But actually, if you really look at decolonial theory, it says we are opening up this space. So different ways of existing, different ways of being, different ways of knowing. So Glenda, I'm keen then to hear, as you open up the knowledge production spaces, what are you finding from the voices that have been previously excluded? Besides the challenges that are there, what are the voices now saying that we're not able to say, either from the students or from the staff members?
So the voices are, it's just a place to actually talk about local knowledge and local identity. And, if it's a textbook, for example, on marketing in South Africa, using a textbook that's from the US, which has been the tradition, is obviously not relevant. So it actually brings in voices that didn't have an opportunity to speak before. So there's a lot of power in that. But I just wanted to add, and going back to Fraser, and I think that's something that we're talking about here, is there's the affirmative that changes end state, and then there's the transformative. And, the open textbook is one way of doing certainly affirmative work. And in the case where authors really collaborated with students and others and decolonized their text to create something truly South African, then that's kind of a transformative. But to really transform, the whole institution needs to transform. You can't have this little pocket that's trying, but that's very difficult. And we know that, to come to the sort of structure agency, social realist theory, the agency is really important, but people come to everything with their own personal concerns. And those personal concerns might not dovetail with social justice or decolonization. It doesn't mean that's necessarily completely wrong. Maybe you've focused on your classroom and passionate about teaching, and you don't see, and you've always done that, so why should you change? And your students are brilliant and your pass rates are brilliant. So it's interesting that there's this tension around agency, and ontological change is difficult.
Here is a challenge. Thank you so much.
We have it in us, so now we've got to change it. So yeah.
Now it's getting a bit more practical. Thanks, Glenda. Here's a challenge. There's a question here from Anonymous. It says, Nancy Fraser writes from Global North, local, English, Global North, local, and with good aspirations. But how does this relate to the South African context in real terms? What are African decolonial scholars saying? What are South African decolonial scholars saying? And how have we applied these concepts in our context? Let me start with you, Keenan. Maybe you might rescue us here. And there is a follow-up question from someone else.
So I think part of it, part of the decolonial exercise, and if it's incredibly difficult, like you were saying, Glenda. If it were easy, then as soon as a new leadership took over, things would change. But I think part of the decolonial exercise is not necessarily assuming that because someone's from the global north, they do not necessarily fit into our decolonial agenda.
Okay.
And that's not at all what I think the question is asking. And similarly, just because someone's from the global south doesn't necessarily mean that they necessarily fit into a decolonial agenda. So just changing, course outlines and course readers, and including people because they're brown and from Africa, I think is an extremely dangerous exercise. But I think, part of it is recognizing that all knowledges are situated. I'm a fan, I'm a stan of Nancy Fraser, but all knowledges are situated. So it's starting to reflect. I think an important activity is starting to reflect on to what extent authors, whether it's Nancy Fraser or whoever, to what extent that knowledge is situated, and whether they do fit into our ontological agenda. So I think because I think it's become, we've entered almost into an extremely dangerous space now, where it's become very marketable to call things decolonial. All of these, capacity development grants, all of these faculty grants ask about the decolonial. And sometimes I read it and ask myself, at least, because, you don't want to create too many ructions, but what is this person, is everything we're doing just decolonial? So I think it's about an agenda. Does it fit into our decolonial agenda? And understanding to what extent are there limitations to and how can we localize those limitations, if at all?
Okay, so you're saying there's a limited extent to which it matters where the speaker or the writer is situated?
Not necessarily. I think it does matter. It does matter. I think, but we need to understand why it matters, and what the limitations of that writer, author is, because that will help us to understand whether it does fit into our decolonial agenda. Some people who are decolonial scholars may also not fit into our decolonial agenda. So it's understanding to what extent the limitations of situatedness tie into our agenda or not. And again, I'm using the word agenda quite purposefully. It is political. There are political choices to be made in terms of decoloniality, in terms of social justice. And with it comes certain limitations. So I think it's about understanding those limitations and understanding the situatedness of that knowledge.
Oh, great, thanks. So that I can advertise a bit, because you do also find scholars in Africa, and particularly also in South Africa. We have even on our campus the likes of Francis Nyamjo, who, in decolonial scholarship, you speak about locus of enunciation, where you enter into a conversation based on where you are located. That could be a disciplinary location, that could be geographical, and so forth. So, for example, Francis will enter into a decolonial conversation from an anthropologist perspective, and he will bring us concepts such as conviviality. So he's got a lot to say in terms of decolonization, but to say, how do we coexist in terms of being able to build friendships? So because in the South African context, some of the problems that were created by coloniality include us being xenophobic against fellow Africans, right? So he's able to enter into the conversation based on his sort of disciplinary knowledge. There's also the likes of Sabelo Ndlovu-Kajeni, who would speak of decolonization as necessary for boosting the self-esteem of Africans, so that we are able to be very creative, right? There's also scholars such as Uliketi Makalela, who enters the conversation of decoloniality from multilingualism perspective, to say, how would you even be creative if you don't even understand your language and you're not proud of your languages, which I mean, in UCT, there are colleagues who are trying to be multilingual in their teaching approaches, right? But here is now another practical question, and Glenda, please feel free. You can also take a step on this previous one, but this one is open-ended. In terms of, so this is Jaisuba Jayakuma, sorry if I'm butchering the name, but the question is, can the panelists share some broader and basic practical tips on decolonizing, especially in the health sciences, /health sciences curriculum? And I mean, you often hear, how could you possibly decolonize engineering? And some colleagues are asking from a very sincere position that it's difficult for them to be able to think, how can I decolonize numbers? You know, how do I decolonize medicine? You know, any thoughts? I mean, from having looked at different ways in which different people produce knowledge in the open textbook project, what's coming up?
Yeah, I just wanted to also just share this. This is fantastic. It's like this is my textbook, but it's closed. I was lucky to get a copy of it. But it's incredible work that's been done locally in using Fraser, but adapting it to the situation. So in terms of decolonizing the sciences, engineering, we've got examples of where, for example, in engineering, we had a student create an open textbook, because he was a postgraduate student and he recognized that students were struggling with a particular aspect of engineering and drawing and engineering. And so he created resources that he felt that the tone and language would be more accessible to students. And he'd had this experience firsthand, and that was one thing that he did. We have another example of statistics. A open textbook, InfoStats. It's been open for many, many years, used extensively. And this author employed translators to translate key concepts into several South African languages. So there are these sometimes small steps, but incredibly important steps. Same thing in chemistry terms, so difficult. And I think this is, Masaka, I'd like to hear more about your work that you're doing. We've been talking, but you haven't told us your story yet. But just important concepts in chemistry, and got students themselves to translate the terms into various languages, so that those complex terms, when you first see them, got them in your language, and then you can try and figure out how to move to the next step. But I think you're the expert in this. You've been working in translanguaging, and
I guess maybe now I'll answer, because there is a follow-up question on the applicability of decoloniality
sorry, this we haven't said.
Yes, so we still have a few more minutes to be able to, and thank you for this challenging question. So Kasturi clarifies that the focus of that question about what's in the global north vis-a-vis what we are doing with it here, its applicability to South Africa. My personal take is that decolonization is not only applicable, but it's necessary for us, because we are pretty much in the mess that we are in ontologically, epistemologically, because of colonization. I mean, if we then separate colonization and coloniality, colonization is when formally we were colonized, certain laws were put into place, certain sort of structures were put into place to make sure that our standards of being and of operating are managed in Europe. We are no longer now formally being colonized, but coloniality remains in terms of the effects of coloniality. We are sitting in an African university, but conversing in a pretty much European language, right? Already we're excluding other forms of knowing, because language is a representative of our ways of knowing and of our cultures and history. So that's coloniality. So it's necessary, because coloniality still lingers around, as some of the decolonial scholars will say, as modern subjects, we breathe coloniality all the time, right? So it's more than beyond applicable. It actually is necessary. So back to you, Glenda, and trying to answer that in relation to the question of how do we then respond, especially in the sciences. So if decoloniality is necessary, then we also have to question how the so-called scientific knowledge, how was it arrived at? Is it, because in science you make observations and then you put forward what you observe, but where have you been observing from? Because you don't observe from somewhere. I mean, from nowhere, you observe from somewhere. But in my sort of field of work, I do a lot of work around multilingualism and particularly translanguaging, where, like in your example, we would allow students to be able to make sense of the key academic concepts using their mother tongue. So if you were teaching a science class, what is anatomy? Because it's isiXhosa, because people do have indigenous names for this different diseases and for the different parts of the body. And what would that look like if you allow a student to be able to do a dissection of the body, but using their language? When they defend in their study, when a student is allowed to do a presentation, but using their mother tongue, you'd be amazed that studies have shown that then, number one, that students' self-esteem is boosted. They want to do more. They want to bring more of themselves to the table. But also they feel like they are empowered in terms of my language is not necessarily a language of storytelling just before bedtime. It is a language of, intellectual engagement. So in terms of multilingualism, that's some of the approaches that even a space such as UCT will have to take, because by only going the Anglo-normative way, we are actually excluding a lot of social groupings and a lot of different ways of knowing. Let me see if there is another question. There is not for now. So in closing, how would you like to close? And maybe you could close by an example of some of the work that you are doing. You're currently in sociology. What is being done there practically?
So, and just to say, I think often the especially in the health sciences, they are doing at this point a lot better and open armed decoloniality than in the humanities, in my opinion. Just speaking about that question, but I think in terms of sociology, some examples are, for example, in assessment, understanding, because I think ultimately it is also about understanding how coloniality has created boundaries between what is knowledge and what isn't knowledge, what's just everyday stuff that the natives know, and what's legitimate university knowledge. Some of those things include some of the assessments that we try to do, things like whether it's things like orals, but then it also includes some of the things that I try to do with education development students, because often it is in the gaps of not knowing and of students. So for example, some of it includes creating banks of terminology that for students, I think often we just assume that power, hegemony, I mean, they're English words, but we just assume that everyone knows these things. And often what we try to do in sociology is then to feed that back into the core courses that we do, then to have sessions with all students, not just the Black students in extended degrees, then to have sessions with all students to say, actually, these are the things around the strange and the familiar that have been highlighted by students. So it includes things like assessment, as well as the teaching space. Yeah.
Okay, great. Are you able to close in 5 seconds? Kidding, 30 seconds. But also selling the work that you are doing. Where can it take us?
I think I've tried to sell it quite well.
Yeah.
I just think, one of the things we kind of said in the abstract was this idea of what can be done practically, discursively, and theoretically. And I think this discussion has been great in actually highlighting some of those aspects. And we know that there's a very big institutional shift that needs to happen. And that's the challenge for everyone, is to really start deliberately thinking about how you are teaching to include everyone in your classroom, how are you creating your content to include everyone in the classroom and enabling everyone to participate equally.
Sure.
And that's the kind of challenge going forward.
Thank you very much. I think what has been coming out strongly is that this thing is complicated, but I mean, we have to teach in socially just ways. And for colleagues who might feel like, okay, we hear you, but where do I start? So just some exercise might involve being able to break down your curriculum in terms of its different layers as a take home, to say, so there's the explicit curriculum, you know, the hand, what you physically give out to students. There's the hidden curriculum, which tells students and the colleagues about the value system of the lecturers, but also of the institution, and also the sort of null curriculum, what the university does not include. So maybe a question might be that you use that as an entry point to say, what is the problem that I can identify? Is it in my explicit curriculum, or is it in the hidden curriculum, or is it in the zero curriculum? And I think also we've got to engage with each other. I mean, the sociologists must engage with the engineers and must engage with the people who are in the projects of really producing knowledge through the open textbook. We have to know what colleagues are working on, even within our campus and beyond. So with that, thank you so much, Kenan. Thank you so much, Glenda, for your wonderful input. I'm wondering if I might have skipped a question, but based on this gadget that I have, it looks like we are sorted. Thank you.
Thank you very much.